When I was in Africa in my teenage years, I could observe the people around, and it deeply made an impression on me. The Gates Foundation asked me to join to help them as a payment expert. Back then, that was called Financial Services for the Poor, later renamed to Inclusive Financial Systems. The easiest way to describe financial inclusion is simply access.
In this episode, we're joined by Kosta Peric, Deputy Director, Inclusive Financial Systems at the Gates Foundation, and a former Chief Architect of the SWIFT network. We will be speaking to Kosta about his work bringing secure financial services to unbanked populations and the work that still needs to be done.
I can't say how lucky I am to be able to not only contribute to this important work, but also have such energy and enthusiasm for it.
Hello and welcome to Money Travels, presented by Visa, where we explore the extraordinary innovations in digital finance, transforming lives and livelihoods everywhere. I'm Rich.
I'm Max. Kosta, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Very nice to join.
So Kosta, that's quite a CV. And I want to kind of dive into, we'll come on to the Gates Foundation, because I think that's super interesting, unpacking some of the work that you're doing. But take us back a few years. You spent, almost 2.5 decades at SWIFT as chief architect. But you went through a couple of journeys at SWIFT, right? And I think it will be really interesting to understand, A, when you joined, and maybe that pivotal moment in kind of 2008 when you kind of moved the culture of that company.
Basically, my career at SWIFT was all about technology and innovation, R&D, really, because all along I was on the kind of new products and services side. In the late 90s, the network was still running on quite old technology. Also, Swift was confronted at that time with requirements for an entirely new product set that was real-time communications. And that's how the entire new renewal, technology renewal concept came about, that we called SwiftNet. So the new network is called SwiftNet. And I was in charge, indeed, as chief architect, on the one hand, to actually develop and put this platform into production in the late 90s, early 2000s, but also then to migrate the whole community of banks one by one from the old platform to the new platform, which was quite an endeavor in itself. It's a kind of, the proverbial change the planes of an engine while it's flying. Then the crisis hit in 2008. What happened, there were changes at Swift. A new CEO came aboard, Lazaro Campos. And the realization came that Swift essentially was in a mode of no risk taking anymore. It was important that back then the motto was failure is not an option, taking from an Apollo 13 movie where they did everything to bring these astronauts back. But it turned out that failure is not an option was understood like, let's not take any risk and let's make sure the platform runs. And innovation became very difficult. So the new CEO said, we need to change this and go figure it out. Like you are part of the furniture here. You know how this company works. But what we landed on that worked and that we ended up naming InnoTribe was this concept of trying to manage innovation in a risk-controlled manner. I called it the castle and the sandbox. If you think about this risk-averse company as the castle, very protected, thick walls, throwing burning oil on invaders and so forth. But then, obviously, if you try to change that castle, it's very difficult. So we invented this sandbox outside of the castle.
So after spending 18 years as a chief architect at Swift, new CEO says, Kosta, you're my man. Can you change the culture of this institution from one that is risk averse to someone that's going to ride the wave of kind of innovation. How was that personally for you when you had that first conversation? That must have been quite interesting, but equally quite daunting after spending 18 years working with maybe similar risk averse businesses in the banks at that point.
It was a big challenge because remember, at the at the heart, I'm a technologist. I'm not
Yeah.
necessarily, an innovation guru or like an evangelizer, or but it was a good challenge, which I felt I could take because I had a lot of connections, and I felt that one, I actually knew that people had ideas because of these connections. Because you had these lunches or coffees with people, and you actually start understanding that people are actually bubbling with ideas. So I knew that. I talked about the castle and the sandbox, and it happened so that on the Swift premises in La Hulpe near Brussels, there was one area where there was an old mill that was standing there pretty much abandoned in the estate. And I figured, well, why don't we reshape it a little bit and actually make this like the not just a mental image of a sandbox, but like the place where we put. So we refurbished this thing in a kind of like a WeWork predecessor of what became WeWork and other things, where we really pulled people out of their office, put them there in another place, and empower them with tools different than in their normal workplace to innovate. So that was the excitement, and my own journey of discovering this was very rewarding because I gave way for others, the team I had, and we gave way to others to create energy, reach out to startups, produce new products and services, and so on. Yeah.
It's a lesson for a lot of companies.
Yeah.
What was their sentiment, and how did you manage to convince them that no, we actually can make that happen?
First, I mentioned Lazaro Campos, who was the CEO at that time. He was very vocal on this. So he actually was very supportive of this initiative that became InnoTribe. And that hugely helped, of course, because if you have the CEO um, say such things, then, people, of course, believe it. So the challenge was to identify those who will those people, those individuals who not only have the idea but actually wanted to do something about it. And then they typically started, and their energy actually would pull people in. And in most cases, when there was an entirely new concept, what happened is that some of it came back to the castle, but actually, in some cases, some people actually left the company to continue creating this. And there are numerous examples of ex-Swifties, as we used to call them, and others that actually pulled together companies that started, some of which are still today and very successful. All of these companies that were created and others that were identified were actually very synergetic with Swift and the community. So the whole thing actually flourished over the years.
I think if we use the term Swifty in any of our PR, we might get a very different demographic of audience. I'd get my 9-year-old daughter kind of tuning in. Just so jumping back, so you spent this time at Swift.
Yeah.
The work that you did in InnoTribe and Conversations took you to the Gates Foundation.
This was 2021, I think. In InnoTribe, we started approaching people, notably Professor Yunus back then, who was very active in Bangladesh, who was very successful with the microcredit. We started seeing early sparks of mobile money in Africa. And so we connected with all this community, and I connected in particular with organizations that were connected to the Gates Foundation. And that's how it eventually happened that the Gates Foundation asked me to join to help them as a payment expert. in the new strategy that was created back then, that was called Financial Services for the Poor, later renamed to Inclusive Financial Systems as it's today. So I joined in 2013 to help shape this strategy that was essentially based on the idea that Bill and Melinda had, that the faster way to include billions of people to some form of adequate financial service, essentially instant payment platforms. And that's how the Gates Foundation journey started.
I guess that's a very different step in your career from being kind of
Yeah.
the chief architect of a system like Swift to an organization like the Gates Foundation. But I just want to pick up on a stat that you said, which is quite a shocking stat, that back in 2013, I think you said it's 3/4 of the world's
Yeah.
population, for almost 4.5 billion people, were unbanked. Was that kind of a hook for you to say, actually, I really want to help do something about this, and that opened up the conversation with the Gates Foundation?
This is one of these things that you kind of intellectually know, but at the same time, you don't know. I knew intellectually about the fact that many people were unbanked, but when you realized and you heard the stories actually of how much people were impacted negatively by not being included in any form of financial system, that kind of like was a total total mind shift for me back then. It got me to a much more personal connection, because I did spend all my teenage years in Bujumbura, Burundi, in Africa. And I actually knew, I could have observed the lives of people in Africa that live on very little money every day. So, so I kind of started putting these things together, my own personal experience, the intellectual realization of the huge issue, of the size of the issue, and then the realization of how bad it is to be unbanked, and how, I, as we went, but like you literally discover that it actually is expensive to be poor, uh, and not have a financial account, because you have to do all sorts of things, like walk, spend time, be robbed, all of these things that you wouldn't suffer from if you actually had a bank account or a wallet today. So
We
this is
can
kind
we
of the combination of factors. Yeah,
can we just unpack that a little bit?
yeah,
And we we talk about, and there's lots of, I guess, phrases in financial services in terms of financial inclusion, financial well-being, financial literacy.
yeah.
Why don't we give us an easy to understand definition of financial inclusion from
Okay.
your words, and then you mentioned, I think the most important thing is, why it matters.
The easiest way to describe financial inclusion is simply that a person has access to a financial system service. Either in today's terminology, we would say either a bank account or a wallet. That is the most basic definition of being financially included. It is far from, yet being productive and using that for your own good. And that is the subject of usage and literacy and so forth. But the most basic, you know, you can't do anything else if you don't have actually ownership of a bank account and or a wallet. Now, if you don't have that, um, well, you are reduced to work with cash, and working with cash is, risky, because you have cash on you. It's not efficient because usually you can't really save in a fully, entirely cash economy. Very difficult to save. Third, it's time consuming. If you have to pay someone remote, well, you have to walk, and you have to walk in some cases for many kilometers and spend time. Or even worse, it can be expensive because if you are a woman in a remote village in a country and you have a son working in the big city, he wants to send you money back. But if you don't have any digital way, well, the only way is to transport cash through some bus driver or someone who, goes back to the village. And that may be free, that may be not free, and that may actually not make it back then, and so forth. So all and then if you consider some situations that we see, not only low, medium income countries, but rich countries where some people are unbanked and receive checks, for example, um, in some countries. Well, if you don't have any financial instrument, the only way is to go to these check cashing outfits that will take you 10, 15, 20% of the amount, and so forth. So all of this is a huge impediment to the productivity. And then secondly, looking at this from the Gates Foundation perspective, the fact that, and kind of explaining why the Gates Foundation is caring about this, is also people who have no means, who deal only with cash. It's very difficult for them to be reached, um, with aid programs from, social security benefit programs in the country, or, to pay the health workers who go out there to vaccinate, and so on and so forth. So a huge, big issue, chunk of issues that come from the fact that people are living essentially unconnected to their country's economy.
I think the Gates Foundation is very well known globally, for various different things. I think, top of mind, usually medical help and, I would say, health assistance, I would say, in Africa and other territories, is probably what usually makes the headline of what the Gates Foundation supports and help with. Financial inclusion is probably not top of mind. Tell us
Yeah.
more, like what is the goal of the Gates Foundation in this field, and probably the mission as well, and the role they play in
Yeah.
Africa, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
but maybe in other territories as well.
Yeah, the simplest way, yeah, and you are right, by the way, the major a major chunk of the Gates Foundation is actually focused on health, reducing child mortality, eradicating a huge illnesses like polio, malaria, and a whole other set of issues relating to making people um, healthier and having less childs dying in the early years of their lives. We have a set of non-health related strategies, as we call them, notably inclusive financial services, but also agriculture, which is about how to empower people to grow more food for them, especially now that the climate is changing. Water sanitation. We talked about billions of people not having access to a financial account, but there are billions of people that don't have access daily to a proper sanitation facility, which is a huge issue of health, again, related to indirectly to health. Gender equality in the use of financial services and others. So we have a whole set of strategies, and the basic mechanic of this is that if you make people healthier, how do you then enable to make to live more productive lives? Uh, have, their grow crops, grow their small compass, their SME that produces, some goods and so forth. So that's the logic of it. Today, I think we are one of the key tenets of the Gates Foundation is about digital platforms. We call it digital public infrastructure. The payments work that we have done so far since 2013 was a digital public infrastructure that enables payment systems to be created that are inclusive. But along that, we have noticed that also digital identity systems are needed and secure data exchange systems are needed. And today there is a huge and much well better known and outside of the Gates Foundation work on digital public infrastructure. But the payments work is entirely part of that strategy.
And so when we look at this, the financial inclusion and the importance of moving away from cash, how do you make that happen? You said it was three-quarter. I think in a recent stat, we were more talking about 1 billion people that are still
Yes,
unbanked. So massive progress there.
massive progress. Yes.
How do you make that happen? Or how did you make that happen?
Bill and Melinda in 2012, 13, had the idea that the way to massively include people would be digital platforms. And we started with payments, then, as I mentioned later, added identity. And so we developed this concept. And in 2013, there were no instant payment systems except the fast payment in UK and to a certain degree Interac in Canada. But we wanted to think about how a payment platform that is deployed on a national scale and that is essentially enabled by the central banks and the regulators, how can that be formulated so that it can include massive amounts of people to the system. And uh, essentially, the concept was articulated around first, around a few observations. If there was 4.5 billion people unbanked back then, one question, natural question, is why? Why haven't banks included all these people? Well, there is a huge number of reasons, but if you boil down, it's really a small set of issues. One, banks are commercial entities, so their mandate is not financial inclusion. Their mandate is to make their uh, board and shareholders happy, and hence it is not in their strategy necessarily to include massive amounts of people. Secondly, if you think about it, if you want to obtain a bank account, you need to provide a whole set of information about you, about your identity, your birth certificate, your address, all ID cards. Most of the 4.5 billion people back then did not have any of that. No formal ID, sometimes no address, sometimes they don't know their birth date, and so on and so forth. So the question then became, well, how so these are the reasons why there were so many people. And then the way to go the way to overcome that was essentially to look at other players, commercial players that actually did have huge amounts of customers. Who are they? Mobile phone operators. And in Africa, notably, mobile phone penetration was huge. In fact, Africa leapfrogged the entire, fixed line business and went straight to mobile. And then back then, there was the early sparks of mobile finance in Kenya with M-Pesa, where people started realizing that mobile phone minutes could be actually exchanged almost like money. And M-Pesa made actually a business out of it. And so all of this converged on the fact that the a payment platform that connects all these players together in a country, the banks, but also the mobile money operators and more broadly digital financial service providers in an instant payment system. That's how you can massively onboard people with the proper regulation as well, so that, for example, you could to obtain a mobile wallet on a mobile money operation, that you didn't have such stringent requirements of identity as you had for a bank account. So that gave rise to this notion of tiered KYC, where you can obtain a mobile wallet to do a certain things that are fixed or limited, but then as you provide more information about yourself, you can grow in tiers. And so, not to make it too complicated, but that was what we thought would work. And in the early stages of formulating this, after reaching out and doing kind of like a world tour to understand what was happening, we presented that to Bill and Melinda, and they said, yeah, this is cool, this is a nice idea, but show me some design wins that this is actually working. And then we engaged early work with some countries like Pakistan, Tanzania, some regional work in Western Africa, where we helped create such platforms. And I'm happy to say, like, just to give a few examples, today in Pakistan, there is a system called RAST that is exactly like I mentioned, interconnects all of the financial providers, mobile or banks in Pakistan, has onboarded huge amounts of people. The transaction volumes are growing tremendously, and we can see the impact, actual impact of people being connected to the system. Similar story in Tanzania, similar story. And so where we stand today is, in many low, medium income countries, the question is not anymore, is an instant payment system the right thing, but how we make it happen. Um, and the exemplars of this, I mentioned Pakistan, but huge exemplars of instant inclusive payment systems are UPI in India, Pix in Brazil. And so they really show how this massive onboarding using digital tools can foster financial inclusion, the basic access, right? And then, but once people are onboarded, then you can start thinking about providing more use case scenarios, notably merchant, notably, government payments, wage payments, and so on. You can start adding use cases beyond the basic person to person.
Am I right to summarize it that to make that happen, you need to have the regulation, you need to have interoperability between the different systems and ecosystems almost.
Yep.
But you
Yep.
also need to have something, a system like against fraud as well, because I guess that's also the underlying issue, right?
Yes. Yes. The issue is, as you onboard people to digital, the question of fraud becomes, conceptually, onboarding people to digital actually is a step towards a safer place than cash, because cash, but at the same time, onboarding to digital opens but you potentially to other, scams and fraud. And so, as we work with these countries, this issue of fraud, or more generally of safeguards, uh, because we are onboarding people who, for the first time, sometimes to a financial system, they don't necessarily know um, everything that's so how this works and how to be protected. So protecting them proactively is a very important design element in all of the work. Actually, it brings me to mention a few things that we did on this front of the technology, essentially, because fraud is essentially a technology play, but it's kind of very costly, very tricky, and no one makes a business out of making a good fraud management. It's like a sunk cost. So, and also when you onboard a lot of new financial service providers, they don't necessarily know how to do this. So it led us to a kind of a pattern over the existence of this strategy. There is a whole set of technology related issues which led us to basically finance the development of technology tools to help that we put in open source. And there are three examples. Mojaloop is an open source software that enables stakeholders, typically smaller countries, but also larger players, to deploy a quality instant payment hub. Tazana is an open source fraud management tool. And then there is also MOSIP on the identity domain, which is an open source tool that enables people to set up, national foundational digital identity systems. So we put that in open source, not to displace the commercial providers that are there, but more to be a help for many countries who don't have all the skills to either start their platforms as they go in their journey, or for them to run these platforms on their own. So that's also something that we did that is perhaps not typical for a philanthropic organization, but it was a barrier in the same way that regulations were a barrier. So it needed to be done, and we did it.
So I think we almost glossed over a pretty powerful stat just then, where we talked about back in 2013, there were almost 4.5 billion people unbanked. As it stands, there are less than a billion.
The World Bank and us, we track these numbers through a system called Findex, a survey that's called Findex. The 2024 Findex results will be published in July. So in the last Findex dates back to 2021, and the number was 1.5 billion. So we'll see where we are in July. But yeah, very good trend for sure.
Incredible progress, and on track to hit the kind of 2030 goal of having full financial inclusion.
We have a shot at 2030. Yeah.
But I've heard you talk about when we talked about the definition of financial inclusion, that's giving someone some sort of access to a wallet or a bank account. I've heard you talk about, well, that's not enough. Like,
right.
What really is full financial inclusion? Perhaps you can expand on that.
Yeah. So indeed, it is. This is the first step, and you really have to think about it in a digital platform way. Well, you do need to have a phone, and you need to have an app store, and you need to have downloaded, Uber and so forth. So that's kind of the platform play. It's the same here. Is you need essentially a basic access, so that on top of that, then can be layered other traditional, services that we know, like microcredit, and or services such as it was a huge, the COVID crisis was a huge enabler of the so-called G2P payments, government to person payments, where it was much more efficient to disburse social help to people through digital channels rather than cash. And then there were some, and then you open it for innovation, um, and you can see, and this is really the next step, is These platforms are there now. Many people, many countries, an increasing number of countries are rolling them out. The next step is and making them secure and making them, with the right safeguards and that they are operational. But then you need to open them up to innovation and merchant use cases, transportation. There were, one innovation that we saw in Africa was electricity on pay-as-you-go basis. It actually, it's a very nice thing, which harks back to my own teenage years in Burundi, when you observe actually how people with a very low income live. It's actually not that they don't have money. They actually have small amounts of money coming in every day, several times a day, because they go sell something, they perform a service. And so they transact actually a lot, but they wouldn't buy I don't know, a carton of milk because they don't have enough money at that point. They buy, a glass. And so pay as you go is a little bit playing to the capabilities of people to pay by providing them electricity on a pay as you go basis, and so forth. So you see, just to pick that an example of how now a payment platform is a huge enabler for this innovation to happen on top, like the Ubers. Uber wouldn't exist if there were no phones and apps, and in the case of the more developed world, credit cards. But here, there are no credit cards, but there is, mobile wallets, and that are linked together in this payment switch, and then you can layer innovation on top of that. So that's the next really effort, and this is where I think there is a convergence at the moment of many, uh, you know, technologies and trends, also related a little bit to. So we have to really take care about how to include this last segment of the population, because we have to care more together than we did so. But the nice thing is that a lot of technologies are making this happen possible. Voice, rather, uh, uh, having people listen or say things rather than typing on phones. LLMs and digital agents that can be helpful, that know their context, that they can help, a small, a medium enterprise, inform them about when to produce this particular ware rather than others, and so forth. So there is a lot of opportunity out there for for caring for this last segment of inclusion to be included, not only in terms of additional use cases that cater for their needs, obviously, but also making this much more natural and easier and safer to use. And I am a huge believer of the emerging trends that we see, that maybe mobile phone is not the only tool that is required, that maybe some voice enabling, biometric enabling devices would be actually much better in serving these certain people, and so on and so forth. I mean, as you see, I'm always about innovation and, and looking ahead beyond the next hill.
The last kind of 12 years that you've spent at the Gates Foundation and the success you've had must be like hugely rewarding for the architect in you, and seeing the growth of kind of technology and how that's kind of fueled your innovation ambitions. But it also, I mean, you've made reference to a couple of times to your upbringing. I know you're kind of born in Serbia, moved to Burundi when you were 10. Your father worked for the UN.
Yes. Yeah.
It must also be like really rewarding on a personal basis. You lived through some of these challenges firsthand. You have this attachment to Africa. Like,
Yeah.
how does that feel? After 12 years of the Gates Foundation.
Yeah, it sometimes feels, and mind you, when I was in Africa in my teenage years, I was lucky not to be poor, but I could observe, you know, the people around, and it deeply affected or deeply made an impression on me, and it kind of feels like my life is kind of like looping around with my latest work, because I do travel a lot to Africa, and because, even though we have partners that we have created, notably African and for technical assistance on the ground, I still think it's important for me to go and my team to go. But it does feel like my life is kind of looping back a little bit on these early days. It's almost like this that the continuity is established between what I could observe way back and then now. So very, yeah, rewarding, surprising, and I can't say how lucky I am to be able to uh, not only contribute to this important work, but also have such energy and enthusiasm for it. So yeah.
And I think I've heard you say before that this whole concept of financial inclusion and what you saw down, in your kind of teenage years was just the potential within these markets. And I think you mentioned kind of Rwanda as the digital hub is just
Yeah.
a really interesting example of that.
This is a big endeavor, and it's important to showcase success, because otherwise energy will, any endeavor of more than 5 years, people will, forget it or look elsewhere. And so it's important to show success. Rwanda is a recent success story. They just launched earlier this year the second version of this their eCash platform, which is an instant payment system on the Rwandan. That their motivation was that exactly what I was mentioning. They did have a P2P basic system before, but that they had trouble basically expanding, because the technology was not done to support all other use cases they wanted to do. And so they embarked on this renewal project. They did it in this case with the Moja Loop technology and went live in live pilot recently. But what is good to see is how Rwanda also loves to showcase their success, and I think it's their pride, of course, but I think it's important, and that's why we also uh, support them in this. And we will create kind of like a demonstration hub in Kigali about instant payment systems, because it's important to show very concretely success every step of the and show people that it's possible, that it is happening. Here are the benefits, here are the positive impacts of all of this, and hitting that point every time will convince not only other countries to come on board. I don't think they need much convincing anymore, but more explaining to them how to get equipped in the fastest possible way.
I want to touch on the impact that you just mentioned.
Mhm.
I would love for you to, to help us or to unfold, I would say, the impact once they've got access to the technology, once, we manage um, to give these people bank accounts, etc. What are the tangible impacts that we see for the individuals, but probably also for the economy and for the country, if not the region?
Essentially, what is happening is that once a person has access, then the first impact, the very first concrete impact, is to already remove all of the things we talked about. They are now capable of receiving their wage, uh, their support from without having to walk to some, to a cash disbursement place, which may be kilometers away, or They are capable of receiving support from their government. They are capable of receiving support from the child or a friend's from a distance. All of this already is a very tangible impact that saves time, makes them more productive, and makes them more safe. That's kind of the basic chapter. The second chapter of impact has to do with their context. So now you have a system, now you have access, now you can start building your history in a financial system because it's a digital. You can now, you are transacting, and as you transact, you start building a certain sense of your context and history, so that eventually, if you do need microcredit, to buy um, this tool for your small medium enterprise, well, someone can look at that history and say, okay, I mean, this person does have some form of regular revenue, and we can provide this credit to them. That's kind of, and then obviously you continue building that. A huge enabler, and the huge way that people work, is with merchants. The merchant, the small shop, and the person, they know each other, and they will know each other better if there is a digital system that tracks what they are doing. So that's kind of the second chapter, which is all this context that is added to the person that enables them to benefit more from the system that they are connected to. The third benefit has to do with accessing additional services, notably merchant, e-commerce. That is for, as the person, if I can say, graduates from the very basic through transacting, creating perhaps a micro enterprise, then becoming a merchant, then having an e-commerce outlet, and so on and so forth. You see how uh, that can then make them not only safer and capable of transacting, but then starting really to enable their more productive life. And then finally, I want to mention the benefit to the country, because I always say an economy that includes everyone benefits everyone. Having huge numbers of newcomers to your economy, even though they are, you know, uh, poor in nature, and that it is still very important for the country's GDP to include all their people, so that essentially the market is expanding, and the market is expanding to not products and services that exist necessarily, but to new products and services that will create more jobs, and so on and so forth. There is a study from McKinsey uh, Institute some time back that estimated also, I can share that, the impact to the GDP of the countries and job creation of having people join the economy. So I hope you can see the spectrum of very rich spectrum of impact on very concrete on people, on the countries they live in.
And is that kind of the sales pitch to businesses
Mm.
and private enterprises in terms of why they should care and why they should get involved?
Yes, and it's an excellent point, because this was originally one of the barriers, actually, when you talk about interoperability, especially to financial service providers, and especially the mobile money providers who have invested a lot of money in making their business successful. And now you tell them, you know what, it's you have to interoperate with essentially your competitors, so that a person can benefit from being connected across the system, and being able to receive money not only from her son that is on the same network, but also from if he's on another network. Originally, that was tricky argument to make, but then uh, today it's not the case anymore because all these providers have understood that they're by doing interoperability, they're actually growing the market. So it's not a zero-sum game where you have a captive market and then you cut it and share it in a different way. You actually expand the market hugely. And we already mentioned earlier in the show that telco providers, mobile money providers, they know how to serve massive amounts of people. And so the market expands and gives them the growth. So now this is behind us. The business case, I think, is very, very clear. And we see this interoperability not being an issue from the business perspective. The other thing I want to mention as well is the business case for the what we call digital financial service providers. It can be called fintechs, the whole domain of non-banks financial services. Um, Obviously, and startups, fintechs, they can benefit from all at once a huge market. Like in the world before, if you were a fintech, you would have to make a deal with Bank A and Bank B and mobile money operator C and this other entity D to establish links with all of them so that your app can transact across. But now you have a single platform and you don't have to do all of these things. All this infrastructure is in place. And so you can benefit immediately. And there was a very successful entrepreneur I was talking to the other day, and like he was saying, Costa, what you do and what you're advocating for is hugely helpful for me because I can't convince my board that I should invest my precious time and money in connecting to all these entities to be able to service across. Now I can, in countries that have an instant payment hub, I'm connected at once to everyone, and that's a huge booster of business because now all at once this infrastructure is set for many people to benefit from and use. Very, very compelling case, but it did take a while to like navigate through all of these, wall gardens and interest, and it's very natural. People, have invested a lot of money. They don't want to, give that money away to others, but they actually realize that the investment actually opens the market much more and serves everyone. So that's where we are today, and I think that issue is behind us, and the business case is quite perceptible for many of these components of the industry. The shift also to cross-border payments, notably in Africa, is very important. We can talk about that. That's another impact yet. We can talk about that later or at another time because that's a whole chapter on itself.
Yeah, but I think it's a very important one because
Yeah,
to the point you're making, it's a lot also it's opening the business, the individual, the country to the rest of the world, but
yeah,
also the rest of the world to the country because it's also money,
absolutely.
flowing in. In a recent, so we just released a recent report, and in our report, our finding is 1 billion people around the globe are actually dependent on the remittance use case,
Yes,
being sending or receiving the money, which is a massive number when you think about it, and it's a
yes,
growing number year on year.
yeah. And by the way, I'm glad you mentioned this. In the cross-border space, there is the remittance case, and then there is like the more regional trade case, which is very, very important in Africa. With the 54 countries, and Africa has this ambition through AFCTA to has a huge ambition that will require cross-border connectivity. But on the remittance case, I want to highlight this, design win that we're working to connect the system in Pakistan that I mentioned, RAST, to the remittance flows. There is about $16 billion of remittances coming into Pakistan every year. And this is this sending remittances to Pakistan can be costly, in excess of 10%, can be slow and insecure. So there is a project we are working on with the Arab Monetary Fund to use the RAST system, the instant payment system in Pakistan, as the last mile delivery for these remittances, to make them much faster and much more less costly. That's a project that is ongoing, but it has been estimated that it can reduce drastically the cost of remittances. You know that the in the UN development goals, there is this goal related to remittances to bring down the cost to 3%. Well, we hope that that project will be able to bring the cost of remittances into Pakistan very close to 3%. So very important. And this is another reason why instant payments are so important, is because on the cross-border connectivity, they make the country much more open and ready for connecting into the international flows.
So in 12 years, almost 3.5 billion people are now
Right.
financially included.
Yeah.
Or almost 3.5 billion more people are financially included.
Yeah.
Huge amounts of progress, and there's so much humility, like from you, Costa. Like it's such an incredible kind of story of you personally and the Gates Foundation. But there's no stopping just yet.
No.
What's coming up, like in this push to get? I think you talked about, it's this last mile. It's getting these last kind of billion or so people onto platforms, into this kind of inclusion. But where's the big focus for Gates Foundation, for you at the moment?
The big focus right now is clearly scaling. We have the 2030 goal. We are very active in Africa. Africa is a huge mosaic with the 54 countries. At the moment, we estimate that about 20 plus countries have instant payment systems that are inclusive in nature. There is about 10 more developing such systems. So there is a lot, only in Africa, there is quite a lot of work and scaling to be done. In Asia, there is a kind of a similar, different, but conceptually similar trend of connecting countries in ASEAN in an integrating payment system. It's really the focus. I'm happy to say, and mind you, I uh, always am careful. When I say we, it's not the Gates Foundation, not me. It's like the huge partner community that we work with that has brought this, and the countries that we work with that have brought these numbers down. So just making sure credit is due to. We are a part of this movement, but so just making sure of that. So scaling, I'm happy to report that we have an excellent network of partners that are aligned, including such huge organizations like the World Bank, the African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, our Monetary Fund, um, uh, uh, regional economic and monetary unions in Africa, like COMESA, YMU, ECOWAS, and so on. So there is a huge focus on scaling so that by 2030, notably in Africa, you can send money to anyone, including in your country, across borders, instantly, safely, cheaply. That's I think there. As we go there, I think, and I always say to my team and partners, you know, scaling in your, in your car, scaling, driving is one thing, but if innovation is happening, the world of finance is moving, we have to be the stewards of how to bring that innovation to the service as we go along. And that I mentioned notably how to leverage AI, large language models, voice recognition, biometrics, and many other things in ways that actually benefit even more the people who are included by making their connection more productive, as I said, making better use of the connection they have to the financial system, but also making them much more efficient in using this and more savvy in using these systems. And I think that's the next frontier, beyond probably 2030, that we need to work on and not let our full attention on scaling. We have to carve a piece of that to focus on keeping focused on innovation. So these are the two, scale, 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 but make sure that we are good stewards of bringing, as we always do, digital technology to the right people in the right way.
You talked about the ecosystem a few times today. And with this podcast, we try to travel the world physically or digitally, to actually meet with, more and more people to unpack the money travel story. I would love to ask you if you had a few people you would like to invite to this show
Yeah.
to share their perspective, to share the work they're doing to actually change that or evolve in their country, innovation or inclusion, whatever topic could be.
Yeah.
Who would be those people you would like to hear from?
We talked about Rwanda, and I certainly would love that you have the minister Paula Ingabire she's the Minister of ICT and Innovation in Rwanda. I think she's very enlightened with digital. Rwanda has, under her sponsorship, gone through this transformation of their payment system. She's at the forefront of Rwanda's efforts on AI. So certainly she would have a lot of good things to share, especially with that African angle where innovation is happening at a tremendous pace. So she would be certainly one to recommend. I would love also to make you aware of Dr. Robert Ochola. He's the CEO of Africa Nenda. Africa Nenda is this organization of technical experts in payments that are capable of helping countries and stakeholders across Africa in this endeavor. So very important organization, and he has a lot of stories to share from many, many countries. Similarly, Paula Hunter, she's the executive director of the Mojalub Foundation. They are also very present in many countries, so lots of stories to share. And then finally, Mr. Prive Masiyiwa. He's a very successful entrepreneur, African, very well known. He's on the board of the Gates Foundation. Very, hugely successful African entrepreneur coming from the mobile phone space. So he certainly would be a great person to talk about how Africa is leapfrogging digital evolution. So these people come to mind. I have lots more if you need.
Some incredible guests there. So
Well, Kosta, thank you very much for your time.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me, and I hope I was not too long. There is so much to tell, and but it was a pleasure telling this story to you and hopefully to your audience. So,
That's it for Rich and I this week. To keep the conversation going, you can follow us on LinkedIn. And of course, don't forget to follow the show wherever you listen or watch your podcast.
And if you enjoyed what you heard today, leave us a review, tell your friends, or better still, do both. We'll be back next episode to explore more life-changing innovations in digital finance. So, wherever your travels take you this week, remember to join us for the next installment of Money Travels, presented by Visa.